Hello, and welcome back to the Making the Brand podcast. If you listened to the recent episode about aviation gin, you may recall that I interviewed Adrian Molina and Dr. Karen Freeberg after we connected via Twitter. Well, Twitter is just the gift that keeps on giving because today's guest is someone else I'm lucky enough to have met via Twitter, Terry Schilling. Terry is a copywriting genius. He generously shares all of his best copywriting tips on his social channels. My favorite is his must-follow YouTube and IGTV series called The Copy Corner, where he packs concise advice on how to write better headlines, taglines, calls to action, and so much more. But it's our mutual love for both copy and nostalgia that brings Terry and I together today. Specifically, our love for the 90s TV show Boy Meets World. I'm pretty sure anyone growing up in the 90s adored Boy Meets World, and while 20-something women were all about the Rachel haircut from Friends, I was the teenager who requested the Topanga. The episode where she cuts her own hair is simply iconic. But Terry will make you see Boy Meets World in a whole new way that'll help you with your copywriting. Please join me in welcoming him to the show. Hello, Terry. Thank you so much for being part of the Making the Brand podcast. I know we've been talking about doing this for a while. I had some international travel that got in the way, and now we've got this coronavirus pandemic. So now we finally have some time to meet virtually. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And yeah, glad we got connected a little bit of a month ago. And yeah, I know you took a trip, but happy we finally did this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've told some people about your background in copywriting, and I'm super excited for your perspective and how we're going to apply that today. But could you give everyone a little bit more detail about your background and how you got into copywriting?
Yeah, so currently a freelance copywriter living in Chicago. I focus a lot working with a variety of clients on writing their website copy and brand messaging. I feel like a lot of those two things tie in together, where we really fine-tune their mission statement, position statement, really kind of, more importantly, their tone of voice and how we can translate that to their website and that they can use on different marketing materials on social media. So that's a big part of what I do. And before that, I was a copywriter at an agency outside of Chicago that kind of got me into the advertising marketing world. And, almost 2 years ago, just decided to pivot and, be my own boss, full-time freelancer, and do that. So here we are.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I saw a tweet today, or I think you actually liked it, where someone was talking about just what an art form copywriting is. So I have tons of respect, tons of respect for you. And just, I know it's not easy. You have to really finesse your words and be consistent in tone and everything. So it's a very highly valued skill. But today we're going to dig into one of our favorite shows, Boy Meets World. So we're going to go down memory lane, and I want to hear more about your memories watching Boy Meets World and why this show is so special to you.
Yeah, this is so awesome. I know just when we got connected and I referenced the Boy Meets World, and it just seemed like such an organic idea to kind of tie this into, and then we came up with an idea for the show and for this episode. But for me, Boy Meets World, it was always just a part of my childhood growing up, the TGIF lineups on Friday, and when Boy Meets World was on there. Just watching it, just to remember those early episodes when Ben Savage, Corey Matthews was so young, and like the Halloween episodes, and then the Disney episode with Corey and Topanga, where he asked him to be his girlfriend, and then all throughout. And then really, I feel like 7th and 8th grade for me, I'm probably going to date myself a little bit, but it was like the episodes when, Corey ended up kissing the other girl at the ski resort trip. And that was
Oh,
just a huge thing. That was even like in the circles of kids, of teens. I was just like, oh my God, are they gonna break up? And then when she comes, there's other episode when she comes back from Pittsburgh. It's just there's so many
oh yeah.
moments.
In the rain, right? She
Yeah,
came back. Oh gosh, it's
right.
all coming back to me.
And then they get married, then they go to college, and those were. I feel like that's when the humor kind of ramped up. It got a little bit more adult humor, if you will, but
Yes,
it was
I
great.
would agree.
But I'll tell you what, Rand, when I was in college, my freshman year, ABC Family. So again, I'm dating it, which is now Freeform. A little
Mm.
bit. So this was like mid 2000s, and ABC Family had the old TGIF lineup. So it was like Family Matters, Step by Step, Boy Meets World, and then Full House. And so I got to just rewatch the episodes all the time because it worked within my class schedule. And so
Hmm.
that just kind of ramped it all up again. My roommate, we were into it because we both watched it. Other guys on my floor, and that just really sparked kind of more of my love for it and
Hmm.
how I can kind of memorize so much about it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a coming of age show. I mean, you see their whole youth and then all the way through to their college years, and you kind of feel like you're right there with them and you can see yourself in the characters. So I totally get it. My brother
Yeah.
was a huge fan and he was the one that got me into it. But what I loved is just any of the Mr. Feeney moments, those over the fence talks that they would do, just the wisdom that that man would share. I mean, it's like we all
Totally.
knew him.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So,
Just life lessons and how they tied in with Eric too. But yes, Mr. Feeney was
hmm
kind of the backbone of like growing up, and
yeah.
that's been amazing.
And then they later went on to do the reboot, which we're definitely going to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you kind of touched on it. I mean, it ran from 1993 until 2000 on the TGIF lineup in the 90s, which I know every kid looked forward to. And then we had
Yep.
Family Matters was part of the lineup for a bit. Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Also, the Clueless spinoff, which I think kind of
Remember that
crashed and
briefly.
burned, but
Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah.
yeah, but what a throwback. Sister, Sister, Step by
Oh
Step, Hanging
gosh.
with Mr. Cooper, all of those, all of those sitcoms. We're going to have to binge them after this.
Oh my God. It was just like order pizza and watch those shows with the
Yeah.
family. And I just remember being out and being like, I want to get home and watch the Boy Meets World show, like Full House. It was
hmm
just a big thing. Sitcoms were huge. And I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
they're,
like we can binge them now where like before, it's kind of like when we all got into Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad in the real time. It's just because weeks would go by or like a whole week where we could talk about it and digest it,
yeah.
create it. It's
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, they were such feel good shows. I mean, for one, with me, Full House. Full House, I kind of
Huh.
learned to talk from Full House. My mom has this
Yeah.
story where I was, I don't know, just under 2 years old. And I wasn't really talking yet, but they played that episode where Stephanie crashes the car into the kitchen.
Oh my
And
gosh. Yes.
and my mom said, she's like, you weren't talking yet, but you saw this on TV, and it's like you knew a car was not supposed to be in the kitchen. And I would like
Yeah.
point at the TV and just be like, oh. I mean, we all grew up in this era, so
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
so much
Yeah.
fun. But one thing you
Absolutely.
pointed out is that Boy Meets World really set the tone for TGIF reboots with Girl Meets World in 2014.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would really be interested in a reboot without a strong foundational storyline that resonates with their original audience. So, what are some
Absolutely.
storytelling and copywriting lessons brands can learn from reboot culture and how these shows have been able to do this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is understanding who your audience is. Because if we use it, when we use this as an example, I mean, they knew that people grew up watching Corey and Topanga, learning life lessons from Mr. Feeney, these words of wisdom. And they learned what not to do from Eric Matthews and how to become a better person as well, even though he became kind of a weirdo and, we could, again, but anyways,
Gotta
Eric
love
Matthews was great. Yeah. But if you understand who your audience is and you can still grow with them and you can reach back to another generation as well by bringing back some of the things that they love and using that tone of voice. I referenced a little bit about it on kind of how I work people with brand messaging, but you can still use some of those nostalgic phrases and some of those life lessons, and you tie that into imagery, and you just have a golden recipe for marketing yourself. because again, you can bring in this new generation, and I think that's what they did with Girl Meets World. But what they did with the reboot is they still had Corey and Topanga. So it wasn't just a new Boy Meets World where a new kid, his name is Jake, and he's got parents, and it's just another old man who's talking across the lawn, which we've seen other reboots do. Like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, they went a little darker on the new Netflix series, but they don't have original characters, if you will, from the TV show. And I think that's what's so popular about some of these other reboots. And they just kind of form this recipe that if you kind of bring back characters that we're familiar with, you know, because we've been a part of this, they've been a part of our history. So now, you know, we can continue to meet our emotional needs because we can consume it again. Nostalgia, it brings back all these positive memories, you know, when we're a kid.
We have something to latch on to. And I think it's interesting because with any copywriting project, with any brand, I mean, the first step is know your audience. And I think it's so interesting to see that even when you're rebooting a show, like they go back to that step one. It applies in every way. So very well said. I love that.
Yeah.
Another thing you touched on was staying true to your foundation. And how has Boy Meets World done that? I mean, you did kind of touch on it with at least keeping some of the original characters and kicking off the storyline that way. But have you seen any other new ways that they've done that and stayed true to their original show?
Yeah, I think it really formed into almost like Corey kind of being, in a sense, the Mr. Feeney. I've watched a little bit of Girl Meets World, I'll be honest. And honestly, I've looked up the YouTube videos to find the episodes where Sean's back and like where Eric is back and all the old characters, because they pretty much all did. And Mr. Feeney was in the very first episode of it. But, you know, Corey kind of became the one, Corey and Topanga kind of giving the life lessons to the kids. And I think that just, you know, ties into it. It's like we live vicariously through these children, but then we also have kind of, you know, the moral compass of Corey and Topanga, which we're accustomed to, which was great.
It's like Mr. Feeney passed the torch. They've grown up and now they're continuing his legacy, if you will. Yeah. So something to consider for brands. I mean, a lot of times there will be situations where brands need to pivot, right? They want to stay true to their original tone and messaging and the overall brand, but maybe there's a big organizational change that they need to communicate, or they're introducing a new product line, or they're merging with another company. So from a copy standpoint, and similarly to how Boy Meets World did it with Girl Meets World, how can brands pivot like that while still staying true to their original messaging?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think we've seen it a lot with brands where they stay true to their message and they stay true to their product and how they help people, but they can use these different nostalgic pop culture references. And even brands can go back to packaging. And you can use certain words too, like discover. You can even use the word anniversary. It's even a power word that you can use in headlines, because anniversary automatically triggers kind of this memory of the past for us. And it typically brings up a positive memory. So if you're older, you know, millennials, boomers, when you think anniversary, you could think of a wedding anniversary. Maybe even could spark birthdays too. But, you know, using some of those words in there can be powerful with the right imagery too. I mean, look at what Discover did for their Super Bowl commercial, where they say no to late fees or no to annual fees. They took all these references from Friends and from Clueless and from School of Rock with Jack Black, all these old movies that we love, but people saying no. Do you remember that commercial? So, I mean, that's just powerful. And they use like phrases like you and no in their copy. And, you know, even just subtly like that, like you is one of the most powerful words you can use with copywriting, because it puts, you know, the reader right there for you. But
first. Yeah. And I think the same way that we see characters evolve over time and grow up, and like I said, how Feeney passed the torch to Corey and Topanga, brands can evolve too. And that's okay if you need to communicate a change in your company and your brand, and your customers will be right there with you if you communicate and don't completely change who you are. You have to stay true to that voice, even if you're communicating something that may seem new or different or out of their comfort zone.
Right. So, and a great example, Brian, was like the Coke for years ago when they did New Coke. And at first it was great. People loved it because it was new. And we all love something new. We all love something novel just to get our hands on it. Especially it's a brand that's been a part of our lives. It's Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually people were just like, we don't like this taste because
Yeah.
they did a different recipe. We want the old stuff. And so they ended up going back to the original recipe in the old Coca-Cola can. But it just shows you that other brands who can do it well, like let's say Doritos, for example, like their taco flavor, they went back to their like 70s, 80s package of the Doritos
Uh-huh.
bag. And now it's the staple. The taco
Yeah.
flavor is still in that bag. So they stayed
Mm-hmm.
true to themselves, but they did something new in the sense
Mm-hmm.
by using the power of nostalgia, but they kept it. Miller Lite did the same thing in 2013. They changed back to their old packaging can, like the old label. And
Yeah.
now I still believe it's the same packaging.
Yeah. And when you see brands do that, or when you see TV shows do a reboot, there's always this fear a little bit, like, is it going to be as good as the original? Are they going to?
Yeah, see? And I think it just goes back to like that formula is bringing back the old characters who have been a part of our lives because it
Mm-hmm.
invokes these memories and it's all these like, all these memories of us
Mm-hmm.
of us
Mm-hmm.
watching it, and it just
Yeah.
taps into these positive cultural memories, like talking
Yeah.
to your friends about, when Corey cheated on Topanga. It's like, what's going to happen to them? It
Ugh,
was a big
dagger
moment.
in my heart.
I know. Like that's the
Well,
golden couple for everybody.
yes, they really are the gold standard.
Yeah.
It reminds me too, when you bring up Doritos and the Super Bowl. I'm a huge Backstreet Boys fan, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Absolutely.
they did. It wasn't this year; it was the year before. They did a Doritos commercial with Chance the Rapper,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they remixed they remixed "I Want It That Way" to introduce a new version of Doritos, the spicy hot
That's right.
Doritos, and was like,
Yeah.
it's new, but it's hot. Or no, they said the original, but now it's hot. So it's like you can tap into those things that way and introduce these new elements and still feel like you're making that connection and not completely deviating from the original.
Totally. I love it. And just from a copywriting standpoint, just again, if you like kind of dissect it, the original, it's like, okay, the original kind of gets this novelty, like, or like think of something old and then, but now it's this.
Yeah.
So now it's just taking something, it's closing this loop in our head. Like, okay, what are they doing now? What's new about it now? And it just kind of goes back to a lot of brands, like trying to find their unique value, sales proposition, like what's unique, what's different and new about you, of why.
Yeah.
So brands can totally tie into that. And, this podcast, you bring up so many good references of using pop culture references too with brands.
You.
So it ties into it great.
And I think from a copywriting standpoint, the way you word it is critical in determining if your audience is going to get on board or if they're going to be like, they're completely changing it. That's not for me. So referencing some of these words, like you're saying, will, have something go off in your audience's head. Like, oh, okay, I'm on board with how it was originally. I guess I can accept this little change, or now I'm excited about this change or this new introduction. So I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the Full House reboot, because that was a huge success with Fuller House. It ran as a Netflix original from 2016 until now, actually. They filmed their final season, but they haven't released the last half of it. How did you see some of these same principles you described for Boy Meets World applied to that reboot and how that became so successful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it kind of just, the biggest thing is they brought back again a lot of the original characters and focused kind of a similar story. With what is her name?
DJ?
Candace Cameron's character. DJ, yeah. It was Danny. Yeah. So Jesus, I can't. Oh my gosh.
I know, we're switching shows. We're all over.
Yeah, I know. It brings up a funny story. Back before Ubers in the city, we would take cabs. Like a couple friends of mine, my wife now, but the girlfriend at the time, we would pretend that we were in cash cab. So if we ever at a red light, we'd pull the window down and ask people on the street like a question. And there was two questions we'd always ask. And one of them was, what are the three sisters' names in Full House?
Oh, you would have just gotten, you wouldn't have won just now.
Yeah, I know. I would have done. The other one was the three animals' names in Homeward Bound, which nobody ever got. But the Full House one was a little bit better.
Gosh, that's quite a throwback. We might have to do trivia when I post this episode.
But sorry to get a little bit off track there. It just always reminds me of that story. But yeah, they brought back those characters. The only bummer was not having Michelle and the Olsen twins back.
Oh yeah, but they
I don't know
poke
if,
fun at that in a lot of
yeah,
ways, hysterical. And I
yeah,
think the same way you mentioned that Girl Meets World felt a little bit more adult. I definitely noticed that with Fuller House. They would
yeah,
poke fun and have more adult topics and things like that. They pass the torch similarly to what Mr. Feeney did. It's almost like Bob Saget
right.
and all of them said, all right, our girls are grown now. Now you have to
Well, yeah,
raise these girls.
what's great about it is like I mentioned in the first episode, you had Feeney there, kind of talk to Corey in the subway in the first episode of Girl Meets World. But then you have you have Danny and you have Jesse, and then you have Joey come back and kind of establish the groundwork. Like, all right, here's the foundation that you guys knew and grew up. And now we're going to slowly introduce all these other new characters and build them around that, like DJ, like Kimmy, and obviously Stephanie.
Yeah.
And, and so the younger generation can get into those storylines. But then us, I know a lot of millennials who have kids watching this show, and they're just like, oh, this is great. These two generations are coming together. So it's such a powerful idea. And, some other reboots, are doing this too now and have had success. And I think we're going to see this more from the nostalgic standpoint, because look at all the bands doing anniversaries of their albums and like selling out all these tours.
Yeah. I mean, it's something to bond over too. I'm sure there are some examples with brands. I mean, you watch Fuller House with your kids because you want to share that moment with them and those memories of you watching the original. And maybe with Coke or some of these other brands, maybe you buy Coke and share a moment with your kids over Coke because it reminds you of your childhood, and you create some of these traditions again, and they come full circle. So I love nostalgia. I think it's super powerful in creating that emotional connection with your audience.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Brands are doing such a good job because they can bring in such a new audience. Because if you can reconnect with, the original users, like the millennials and Gen Zs. I mean, like Microsoft did something interesting. I saw an ad about Internet Explorer, and they went through like Pogs and Tamagotchis, and they did all these things. And then it's just like Internet Explorer hasn't really changed. Like, it's still here for you. And, it's just like, it's like you grew up and we grew up too, I think was their tagline, which I thought was awesome. And it was really great.
In a way, it's almost like activating a referral from generation to generation. It's taking that original customer or viewer and their love and having them pass it along and refer, if you will, their children or other people in their family.
Yeah.
So fun.
No, absolutely.
So let's geek out about some other reboots that you've mentioned.
Yeah, we touched on it. Yeah. So one that I definitely want to touch on is Cobra Kai, which is a reboot of Karate Kid. So the famous movie from the early 80s with obviously Danny LaRusso and Ralph Macchio, obviously the actor.
Yeah.
And so what they did is Johnny Lawrence, the bad guy in that, who he ended up defeating at the end, like it almost starts off that in the new Cobra Kai of him just kind of living back at home in California, or not even home, or his hometown, but just kind of being, down on life and like struggling to pay rent, trying to figure out what to do next. And then, Ralph Macchio's character, or Danny LaRusso, is a car salesman and his billboards are everywhere. So clearly he kind of rose and is still prominent figure in the area. But Johnny Lawrence is struggling. And then he ends up meeting a kid and teaching him karate, and then ends up starting, another dojo and does all these tournaments. And so they can bring back all these old characters again, but you have the foundation. And I've heard from other friends and other people who have children that they're like 10-year-old sons love the show. And the dads love it too, because Karate Kid was such a big part of their life growing up. It's such a big movie.
Yeah.
But that's one that took that same formula that Boy Meets World did, that Full House did. And you just have these characters that you already have this relationship with. Yeah. And it's going to strike up all these memories. And now you can reach a whole new audience too.
And keep it going. Yeah. I don't know if it was just because I was a little girl or what, but I was always on board with the Hilary Swank version of Karate Kid.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that one.
I think that's the fourth one, I think.
Yeah. That was like major girl power. But you've also seen it with Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, so Disney Plus is they've already started shooting it. And Emilio Estevez, Coach Bombay, is already signed up to do it. I don't know if any other of the original players are back.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think just having that instead of just having this whole new story around these hockey players, like you could have easily done the same exact story. Like some guy, hotshot lawyer, ends up getting a DUI and has to coach this minor league hockey team.
Right.
But instead, they're bringing back these characters that we know, especially this prominent one, and kind of building around that.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're hearing about it with Friends. In Beverly Hills 90210 did something similar. But you can take these shows, and I mean, these people are older. They probably have children, and you can make a whole new story around it.
Yeah, and why reinvent a good story when you can just continue it and keep it going? So we've seen that a lot. I think one of the biggest takeaways here, and we've touched on it, is that reboots tap into your audience's emotions, right? They take us back to that initial show that we fell in love with, and they give us something new to look forward to, new storylines, new characters. So how can brands use copy and storytelling to tap into nostalgia? Do you have any more tactical examples that people can apply?
Yeah, I think, again, especially when it comes to copywriting, it's definitely like part of your word choice. And I think if you're a much older brand who already has an established product, I mean, you can use something similar like what Doritos and what Miller Lite did, or what we talked about with Microsoft and Internet Explorer, and talk about all these nostalgic memories that they have for kids. Like even copy, references like, remember this, it's a question. You could just have that as like your headline.
Yeah.
And it's from an established brand. And again, as consumers, when we hear a question, we want to close that loop. So we want to continue reading so they have our attention. And then you can go into the body copy, maybe do a pop culture reference, and they don't make it like this anymore. It could be something, an example of copy to kind of tie it in. And then you obviously just have like an actionable close of how they can buy the product, take advantage of a specific offer or what have you. But if you don't have an established audience with your product or service, you can use pop culture references, like similar to what Discover did, but you can even do it on a different level. I mean, we've seen it with Aviation Gin, which you talked about on your last podcast, which was great, by the way. That was really cool to hear that, the story of how Ryan Reynolds got involved, but they did it with Peloton. I mean, that was a huge ad.
Yeah.
And, so big pop culture reference from that commercial, but you can tie into that and you can be really smart about it as long as you keep it on brand. And it kind of goes back to knowing who your audience is and establishing that tone of voice and core values behind your brand too.
Yeah, it's like Adrian said on that episode, like pop culture is culture. It's a way to be relevant. I noticed this nostalgic angle, kind of like what you mentioned, remember this, and these throwbacks, if you will, a lot with my college. They'll go back and they'll post a picture of the land before any buildings were built. They'll say, look back to 1950 something, and then people would say, oh, when I was a student, we didn't have this and we didn't have that, and now they have this, and now they have that. And it just brings you back to, gosh, your glory days of being in college that everyone wants to reminisce about. So I've for one noticed that. But Throwback Thursday, I mean, that's a huge thing. And just anytime you can throw it back, people just get the warm and fuzzies and want to engage and talk about it.
Totally. You see all these old pictures of yourself in the Throwback Thursdays of a brand, or it's so powerful. But it also taps into like exclusivity. Like you almost feel part of this group if you take part of like Throwback Thursday, or just if you see like nostalgic from a certain brand, you feel part of it. You feel excited because you watched that, or you were part of that from the beginning. Like Girl Meets World, you feel part of that group already because you grew up watching that.
You're in the club.
And not everybody did, of course, as much as we did probably. But it taps into that too. It continues that story, and it's just like, you know what, we didn't forget about you in a way, which is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, nostalgia is just one of the ways that you can tie into people's emotions. What other tips do you have to stir up emotions and inspire your audience to take action with copy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's so many psychological triggers that can tap into different emotions. Like obviously fear of missing out, curiosity are two of the big ones.
Yeah.
And even a phrase like "don't miss out" is such a powerful phrase that you can use to do fear of missing out. But with curiosity, again, it starts with asking a question is a great way. Like what, how, who, and again, you just want to close that loop, and it continues them to read. but there's like a bunch of other phrases. Imagine is a powerful word. Discover, because you're going to experience something new. Reconnect is a good way to bring up nostalgia as well, depending on what you do with the imagery. And then there's just a lot of strategic phrases that you can use to strike emotions and to bring up hope. I mean, copy to me is like showing people what's possible with your brand. You have to communicate what you can do, because you can have this amazing idea for a show about this kid named Corey who grows up, but you have to be able to communicate that well and, establish who your audience is and relate to them.
Yeah. It's almost like any phrase or any piece of copy you can put together that gives people the opportunity to reflect, whether it's reflecting on the past and nostalgia or simply reflecting on a current problem in their life that they need to fix and take action and make a purchase or, opt into something. It's giving them a chance to think about what they're going through or what they've been through. And that's what's going to make them take action.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just like when you're thinking of nostalgia, I mean, you can almost bring it up where it's like you can experience this again. And, it's such a powerful feeling. And like a lot of us as consumers, we're all buying products to really be our best self in a sense. We feel cool having Apple, or we're committed to the Android brand, but it's such a big part of our lives, and it simplifies things, and it feels like it makes us better in some way. Yeah. And so, and copy is a huge part of that, of how they communicate that message, like the aspirational language. That's why like Imagine is so powerful for me, and I do like to use, just because it almost like puts them in the mind frame of, okay, how is this going to help me become the best self? It's like, well, imagine this situation. Yeah. And you can bring up like a pop culture reference that you may feel that your audience can relate to in that sense. And it's like, you can experience this.
Yeah. When you use a word like imagine, it's almost like your audience sees the solution already and making this product or service or what have you part of their life already, and they could see it in the long run. So it is really powerful. I'm going to try to, that's a good tip. I'm going to try to incorporate that a lot more. I love that you bring up hope, especially right now, depending on when people are listening to this, but with the coronavirus pandemic and just maintaining hope. And I think we've seen a lot of it on social media, particularly with sports, with a lot of sports at a complete halt right now. I know I've seen a lot of brands bringing back old clips and old debates. And
it's such a good, it's such a good point. As we're talking about nostalgia and all these reboots, just look at all the ratings. I wonder if like certain networks are going to be like ESPN could be like, oh my God, did you see how many people watched Game 6 of the NBA Finals from 2015? It's just like, should we do this? Should we do this more often? Like Monday nights, just do a throwback game for people. And that's a great point, Brian, because it's so true. It's kind of this point where, we can still be a part of their lives. Like we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's go ahead and show them something that will bring up positive memories, like a moment in their life.
Yeah, it brings us back. I think that's one of the things that will end up being a silver lining throughout this very difficult time right now, this uncertain, unprecedented time. But I think as copywriters and marketers, we're learning more about our audience because we're being tasked with communicating to them in different ways and trying things we haven't done before. So I think that's a great message. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add about copywriting and nostalgia, Boy Meets World, anything that
Oh man, I feel like I definitely want to go on Disney Plus and rewatch some episodes. Maybe go on a YouTube binge too, just some clips. But I mean, I think too, like if you're like a freelancer or solopreneur too and growing your own brand, like look, such a powerful tool you have right now is your email list to build people, as so many people are online. And so use this time to add some personality and reference some of these pop culture references and bring up some nostalgia for your audience too. Yeah. Because you can almost bring up like a scene from Boy Meets World. Like who remembers this scene from Boy Meets World? That could be your subject line. And you can definitely see and test it of how many people opened it. It's like, okay, people like these type of references. They can kind of get an idea of that. And you can tie a story into Boy Meets World. You can definitely probably just take a Feeney quote and tie it into some type of marketing lesson right now. But that's one advice. It's something I'm trying to do with my email list more is like use some of those references because it just helps you find common ground with your audience. And especially at a time like this, you don't you don't have to stop selling, but you just have to be careful how you do it. And you just
Right.
have to be self-aware and have empathy with your reader. And you can definitely do that through some entertainment and providing information too.
Mm-hmm. I love that because I think we're all sort of over any overly sales oriented subject line. It doesn't interest us anymore.
Yeah.
We tune it out. But if you ask me about Boy Meets World in the subject line, okay, you have my interest. I would open that.
It's
And
like, okay, I'll do this webinar now.
Yeah.
that's that's the close. I somehow tied that into signing up for a 60-minute webinar with my it worked for sure.
You got me. I know for one, I love to incorporate GIFs into my email. From movies or TV shows or whatever. It's just, like you said, a way to add personality, find that common ground, and relate to your audience, which I think really should be the goal for any piece of copywriting.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this was so much fun.
Yes, that was cool.
I'm going to have to go, and I guess I need Disney Plus now. I got to figure this out so I can go rewatch it all. But tell everyone where they can follow you, where they can learn more about your copywriting services, where they can get your YouTube channel and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So really you can find me looking up Terry Schilling Copywriter, probably across all social channels. Really active on LinkedIn and Instagram. Twitter especially, it's how you and I connected, brands. You can find me there at tshill86. I haven't changed it yet. I still have like the classic last name and the year I was born.
So nostalgic of you.
Yes, exactly. TerrySchillingWrites.com is my website. It's WRITES for writes. And there I have some free products that you can download. One of them is how to write about what you do for a living. So whether you're kind of stuck at home in this time and trying to maybe reinvent your brand or look at it, that can help you kind of write your bio and start your about page of how you tell people what you do instead of the common I'm a blank for this company. So that's been really cool. Been a lot of positive responses from that, and you can learn a little bit more and see some of my work on there too. But please give me a follow on Twitter and on Instagram as well. I'd love to kind of connect with you guys.
Perfect. Yeah, this is excellent timing. I know I struggle writing my bio all the time. I'm like, it's the hardest thing. It's like, okay, who am I? How do I put pen to paper on this? So
yeah, it's hard for sure.
Go to Terry's website, download all of his resources and tools, and go and follow him. This has been a blast. Thank you so much, Terry.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much. This is great.
If you're a fan of this podcast, be sure to subscribe, or better yet, leave a review. You can also join our Facebook group called Making the Brand Groupies for real-time pop culture discussions you can actually learn from. As always, thanks for listening.